Hello, everybody, and welcome to 30 Minute Thrive, your go-to podcast for anything and everything HR, powered by MRA, the Management Association. Looking to stay on top of the ever-changing world of HR? MRA has got you covered. We'll be the first to tell you what's hot and what's not. I'm your host, Sophie Voller, and we are so glad you're here. Now it's time to thrive. Well, hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us today. In this episode specifically, we're going to be talking about cutting-edge HR trends with MRA HR business partner, Carrie Wozniak. From optimizing employee experiences to balancing tech with humanity, we'll give you advice on how HR can navigate challenges like hybrid teams and sustainability, while also implementing innovative recruitment and leadership development strategies to really shape the workplace of the future. So, Carrie, I know you really work directly with a lot of our member companies, and you've been in HR for over 20 years, I think. So you've really seen it all when it comes to HR trends and challenges. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to really sit down and talk with you on what you're currently seeing HR trend-wise. So thanks again for being here today. I'm excited.
Yeah. Thanks, Sophie. I'm excited to be here too.
Well, just kind of kicking it off, employee experience is often cited as a critical factor in organizational success. So how are HR professionals really working to enhance and optimize the overall employee journey with their companies?
Sure. This is an ongoing area of concern and has been for quite a while for HR. As everyone is aware, we've been involved in a labor shortage for quite a while. It's not expected to change anytime soon, as birth rates are low and generational changes and all that stuff's kind of coming through. So the employee experience becomes critical to attracting and retaining your talent. So some just key things to think about is you really need to be listening to your employees. It's okay to read the articles out there, listen to trends, pay attention to what's going on in the world, because that will help guide you in the right direction. But your teams and your environment is going to be a little bit different than anywhere else. So you want to make sure that you have frequent and targeted feedback loops with your employees. So think about things like pulse surveys, small group listening sessions, stay interviews, things like that, so that you understand why people stay and why people leave. And you can address those to make sure that you have the right employee experience. You also want to make sure that you're starting small and implementing quickly. We just don't have the time anymore to plan for a year and then take a long time to implement and have the perfect programs. Instead, we need to look at these things as continuous improvement. Pick a few things that you can implement quickly that will have an impact on your team, and move those over the finish line so that you actually see the impact of those. And then, of course, circling back with your employees, making sure that, did you actually hit the mark? Is this what they wanted? So that's general guidelines on how to tackle things, but some actual specific ideas here are communication tools. So you need to make sure that you are communicating with your employees through the channels they actually use. We are so used to using email, newsletters, even home mailings that are now pretty old school versions. You still need those because you have a lot of people who are comfortable with them. But now you need to be looking at, are you texting your employees? Are you recording video messages? Are you utilizing instant messaging? What about like communication apps like Slack? Things like that. You need to make sure that you're communicating with your teams in as scary as it is, in all of these places, or at least in a select few, and that you're having that same consistent message regardless of where you're communicating, because you want them all to hear the same things, but where they're actually going to go, where they're going to go use it. And in that, you're considering your generations, you're considering learning and communication styles, and then what technology is actually available to the individual. Your manufacturing employees don't necessarily have the same access that your office team has. So how are you making sure that they're still getting the messages that you need to have them out there? And time is always an issue. So don't overwhelm your communications team with a million different things to focus on. Make sure it's a sustainable process and that you're automating where you can. Mm-hmm. So some other things beyond communication kind of tools is you want to make sure you're integrating and simplifying your technology tools. Again, the more things you have, the more you got to manage. So looking at fewer sources of truth or better aggregated tools to be able to pull your information. Think about the consumer experience your employees are used to when they're at home, right? They're using Alexa, Siri, Google in order to get the information they need to do their personal work in seconds. But then at work, we're going into different drives, different disparate systems. You got to remember where everything's housed and how you actually pull everything together. It's time consuming and it's frustrating. So how do you mirror that consumer experience at work that they're used to at home?
Right, absolutely.
So lots of technology things.
No, absolutely. And I feel like, just to add on that, the employee experience, it comes down to how well you can listen to your employees and implement the things that, they want and that they're interested in. So I like that you highlighted that you don't always have to listen to the outside conversations that might be kind of pulling you in. It's really about, what does your company value? What do your employees value? And something that might work for one person might not work for another.
Exactly.
So I'm glad that you highlighted
personalization, right? Like at the end of the day, your employees want to know that you know them.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. All right, well, kind of moving on now into flexible work arrangements. That's been a key trend the past couple of years now. So how is really HR addressing the challenges of managing hybrid teams then, and what strategies are being implemented to ensure collaboration and communication remain effective?
Sure. So there's a couple different things in there. So being flexible in the first place, creating those flexible work arrangements is going to be really, really important. We're hearing a lot about, it's no longer about work-life balance, it's about work-life integration or fit. And the concept there is, it's not how do I fit my life around my job, it's how do I have meaningful work that's going to support the life that I want to have. And while that seems like a nuance, it's a really important distinction because employees maybe don't want their whole identity to be what they do for a living anymore. And everybody has different challenges, whether it's they're raising children, if they've got aging parents, if they've got just hobbies or, desires to travel the world or whatever those things are. They want to figure out how to balance that while providing the opportunity to be a professional, to contribute in different ways. So to me, one of the key things that employers need to do is be creative. We can't just sit there and look at, well, everybody has to work 9 to 5 in an office and do things exactly the way that we've historically used it. The pandemic, not that we always want to bring that up, but it just changed people's expectations and how they know they can get work done. So whether it's remote, hybrid, so where you actually do work, but there's also the actual schedule itself. So can I work maybe 4/10s? Can I work long hours on weekends, or even a combination of those things? Is it more, I just need to get my work done? When I get it done, maybe matters a little bit less. You can even look at hiring people into job sharing kind of situations where maybe you're hiring 2 part-time people to accomplish the tasks of 1 full-time job. A lot of companies are starting to use contractors and consultants, kind of this gig concept. Like I have a project, I'm going to pick that up, I'm going to work on it. So if you're employing people in these new ways, it's not all just full-time Monday through Friday kind of employees, then you've got to figure out how do you communicate amongst all these different schedules? How do you ensure that people feel like they're part of a team? And that, especially you hear it on the weekends and like night shifts and things like that, they kind of don't feel like they're part of the team anymore. So a key is actually pulling people together in collaborative and strong communication ways. So with a focus on actually getting to know each other, having that social connection while you're still being productive. So can you hold your team meetings in person? Maybe you have core hours that everybody has to be there on Wednesdays from 10 to 2, but other than that, we can kind of work around it. But in those times when you're having people in these more collaborative work environments, make sure it's fun. Make it worth driving into the office. If I could have just done my meeting on Zoom at home anyway, why did I drive 45 minutes into the office today? So make sure it's worthwhile that they're having those connections, and it's not always just work. Like some of it's getting to know your team, having just that time to talk so that they can work better on other things outside of those meetings too. So I think it's just really important that there is that environment when you're together, that you're having fun, you're still getting things done, and you're building that team environment.
No, absolutely. I love all those ideas, Carrie. And we talk a lot with Jim Morgan. You mentioned the generational differences, even with flexible work arrangements. He brings up a lot of ideas and even challenges with generations and working flexible hours. I know sometimes we talk about, he's like, why are you emailing me at 2 a.m.? And it's like, hey, that might work for me and it might not work for you. But if the employer and if HR can understand that, not everybody is the same. I think that will, I don't know, it just helps create kind of that more cohesive team, even if everyone's not working the same 9 to 5, like you mentioned.
Right. Well, and what you get with employers, I think the resistance comes from we've never really learned how to manage people that way. Historically, I kind of call it button seat management, which is maybe not the best term, but we're so used to like, I see you working on your computer, you're actively engaged in a meeting, I can tell that you're doing your job. When you're not in front of me, when I can't actually see the work that, well, not that you're even seeing an output in that scenario, but when I can't see that you're working, then people question, well, maybe they're doing something else. And then there starts to be this little bit of distrust. We need to change our management styles to focusing on outcomes instead. So it's not as much about how many hours I worked or when I worked or, whether or not you went through 100 emails today or, all of that. It's, I need to produce this result. So am I doing something of quality? Is it effective? And am I having a positive impact on my team? Those are things we need to start measuring, but they're harder. They're just because a lot of jobs, they don't make widgets. It's not that I'm going to produce 30 of these things an hour. So how can I say I have strong output in what I'm doing? So managers and HR need to take a step back in these and evaluate the roles. How do I manage these positions effectively so that I'm not questioning whether or not they're actually doing their job? It's the right thing. The right thing is what I produce, not how long it takes me to produce and where I do it.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Carrie, we're also in the age of social media and increased transparency. So I'm curious, how is employer branding evolving then with that in mind? And what role does HR really play in shaping and promoting a positive employer brand and culture?
Sure. A lot of this goes back to that employee experience that we talked about as the first question. This is now your content for your employer brand, right? Like when you're asking the questions of your team of what they want, then when you actually put programs in place, when things are effective, then that's what you need to do and tell the outside world about it, and remind your current employees when you're doing those things and what the benefits of having them are. So making sure that you're telling people the things that you're working on, and getting that out there. But you need to also make sure that the employer brand rings true to what your environment actually is. I think historically, marketing would put together this really professional and buttoned up program that made everything look perfect. We're seeing now instead that employers are taking their phones out and they're recording things just as much more casual, but it's more real. And I think the candidates today and employees they connect to that because they know that things aren't always produced. And it's not that everyone's always beautiful and an actress and these things. Instead, I want to see my coworker wearing their uniform, actually working on a piece of equipment, talking about what their day is. This comes in as what recruiters always refer to as the realistic job preview. You want to know if you're coming into an organization, what you're actually going to experience, not just what your leadership wants people to see. So being very, very honest about it, making sure that what you're putting out about your employer brand, whether it's on social media, whether it's just through word of mouth, that it actually matches what your organization does so that when someone comes into the organization, they can go, okay, this is what I thought I was getting into. And there's fun ways to do that, especially small businesses. I think they tend to think they need a full marketing team to build this out. You can put little notes out about employee promotions or, new hires and anniversaries. You can talk about your long-term employees and, what has their career path kind of been throughout the time they've been there. Or you brought in pizza, post it. That's okay. Those are truly things that you're doing as an organization. But then try to encourage people to do more. Like if you do volunteer days, can we post about those? If there's training that's been received with, maybe you sent somebody to MRA and they got certified, put that out there too, because these are things showing how you're actually supporting your employees in real life.
No, absolutely. Those are all great examples too. And I like the pulling out your phone and just taking a casual video. I feel like I've heard that so much recently. And I think Amanda Mosteler, one of our learning and development instructors, called it like the TikTok era, where you just do a quick 30-second video, kind of showcase who you are, what the brand is. And I had a funny story about that. Our marketing team was, when we work on some project, should we bring in the light? Should we bring in the cameras? Kind of like you said, the full produce. And it's like, no, just take out your phone, record it selfie style. That's what everyone wants to see. And like you said, it's very relatable, and it may or may not be a generational thing. As in, I think the younger generation is used to seeing that stuff all over. And maybe that's something that the more seasoned professionals have to get, used to that style. But I definitely agree that that's where branding and kind of digital content is going, is the more relatable content.
Yeah. And I think while it is generational from the standpoint of expecting it, I think all the generations kind of recognize that it feels more accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
That it's like, okay, that actually probably happened.
Right.
They didn't spend $100,000 to produce this video, and the questions that can come behind that messaging. So I think it is it's more about being transparent with who you are as an organization. And I think there's tools to make that easier to do. And actually, just as I'm saying the word transparent, the other thing that is really important with employer brands, and HR knows this, is your pay. Pay transparency is really, really important. It's coming. If it's not already in your state, it's coming. The legislation's there. Candidates expect it. We got to stop trying to pretend it's something nobody talks about, and start being more upfront about it. And so how do you wrap that into your employer brand? We can't necessarily be the top payers and with all the best benefits, you have to balance your dollars. But you can talk about what's key. Do you have incentive compensation that helps you stand out? Do you, maybe you are paying at the higher level, or you have some special employee benefits. Your total rewards is a balancing act, but make sure that you're talking about that, and that you're being upfront about what you believe the job is worth, because then you're going to get the people to apply who also think that's what the job's worth.
Right. Yeah, for sure. So just continuing with the digital training here, with the rise of automation and AI. How is HR really balancing technology adoption with the human touch in managing talent and fostering a positive workplace culture? I feel like this has been a big challenge for a lot of people recently.
Well, it's so new, and I guess it's not new. I grew up in the 90s and we're watching the Terminator, right? You expected it to come. And now it's a question of what does it mean in reality and not in science fiction. And so every business function, including HR, is grappling with this at some level. I think the most important thing that HR needs to get out in front of this on is to remind employees and themselves, AI is not replacing you. There is still another job on the other side of it, no different than, and in the Industrial Revolution, when we started seeing machines come into manufacturing, we didn't stop hiring people because the machines were there. Now we just needed a different skill set. And so we got to make sure that we're keeping people trained, that they're learning along the way so that they don't get left behind. Because again, the AI is not going to replace your job, but you not learning how to use it will make someone else replace your job, the person who actually does have that skill. And so that's important for each of us as professionals. We're employees too, but we need to stay in front of our employees and remind them that jobs will exist. It just might not look tomorrow exactly the way that it looked today, but it never has. So that's not completely unheard of anyway. But so we need to get in front of that. We need to communicate with them, where we see AI coming into their particular roles, and then take the time to build training and adoption tools to help them get there, because it is going to be new for everybody. So let's just keep everybody moving at the same time. Things to think about on where AI probably should be coming into play is you're trying to automate manual and repetitive processes, that don't require creativity, strategic thinking, or what I think is important, an empathetic response, right? People need to do that. But if the rules are already there and it's A plus B equals C, get people out of that. It's not worth their time. That's when you start to have the technology come into play to do that. So for HR specifically, that might be answering questions on policies and benefit inquiries, like it's factual. Being able to use a chat bot for something like that. How do you use systems and tools? You don't necessarily need to have somebody standing in front of them doing the training. How can you have effective training that's there that they can utilize and access without taking up the time of an individual? Things like metrics and data reporting, should all be able to be set up, automated. Resume screening and interview coordination are hugely time-consuming things that, again, as long as you define your factors, can very much be done by a software. And then performance cycle administration, I think, is an area that can really get focused on with AI. What's scaring people is the idea that performance management, actual management, might get in being used with AI. I don't see that happening for quite a long time, because there is still, that's the creativity and strategic thinking. And we'd have to have pretty fancy software to be able to get that right. But that leads into HR has to be a gatekeeper of, if you want to call it algorithms, if you want to call it parameters, whatever the rules are that are being built, HR has to review those for bias. So you can't have your recruitment software picking your hires because there is inherent bias in the data that we're using to automate this, the process in the first place. And we have to question it. We got to poke holes in that. Same with compensation, career development, anything that is truly career and employment impacting. HR really needs to be reviewing what those rules are that are being put into the system, and doing adverse impact analysis to make sure that we're not going to have whether conscious or unconscious bias come in, because that's going to get you in legal trouble. But more importantly, it's unethical.
Right. No, I'm really glad you reiterated the point that AI is not going to get rid of your job and that we still need you. I feel like I've heard that in a lot of places, and we've talked about it on a couple of podcasts. But those are also great examples of where HR and just business overall can use AI and how you can kind of integrate it into your automated processes. So you can focus on more of the strategic planning and processes.
Like the things you don't like to do because they're boring.
There you go. There you go.
And then you can focus on like the stuff that you actually really want to do, which is using your brain.
Exactly. Well, the concept of agile HR is also gaining popularity. So my question is, how are HR teams embracing agility to respond quickly to changing business needs and market dynamics?
Yeah, this is I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it's changing your mindset from only implementing things when they're perfect to getting into an iterative continuous improvement process. We just don't have time with how quickly things change to make sure everything is perfect. We can't build a handbook, have it go sit on a shelf, and 5 years from now, look at it again. You have to be pulling things out every 6 months, reviewing, making sure that there's minor tweaks and rolling things out. I was looking up, just some my kind of concepts, like technology is becoming obsolete in 3 to 5 years. So if it takes you 6 months to select a new HRS system and a year to implement it and 6 more months to optimize and get it really working for you, you're now ready to replace it again.
Right.
So you need to be constantly changing and tweaking and adjusting. And that is going to be the case for not just your technology tools, not just your HR resources, but really anything that you're touching in support of the business. So when you're talking about career development, maybe you're creating career ladders to retain people. You can't just build the program and come back to it a couple of years later and expect that it has been working the whole time. So roll something out, 80% good. Learn, from that, and then make adjustments, and be transparent with your employees. Be like, hey, we tried it. We found something that didn't work. So now we're going to adjust and try to make it better. So that's necessary with just about everything. When, regulations keep changing, your employees and candidates' expectations are changing so rapidly. We're just in a world where the iterations are coming so much faster that you have to, you just have to keep adjusting along the way and don't worry about perfection. And then, of course, the AI stuff, automate where you can so that you don't have to spend your time on administrative tasks and you can focus more on these things that need to keep changing in response to needs of your business. And then I would say, and celebrate wins, because we kind of forget that step. There's burnout, all that stuff kind of comes because everything is coming so quickly. So when you do implement something, remember to celebrate it. Say thank you, remind people that it's happened so that they see the work and effort that's happening. Take a little bit of a breath before you move on to that next project.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great advice. Kind of moving the conversation to a little different topic here. How is HR addressing the growing importance of sustainability and corporate social responsibility in shaping workplace values and practices? I think this is something our listeners are very curious on, and they kind of want to know more about this topic. So I'm excited on this question.
Yeah, it's very different now than I'll say when I started my career. I would say even, probably even 5 or 10 years ago, and people were talking about corporate responsibility. But it was more like, don't be a bad player. Don't have the Environmental Protection Agency coming in and, doing something from a legislative standpoint. Now it's more about aligning your organizational values with your business process. So if you go out on, many company websites, they'll have their mission, vision, and values. You see, common things about integrity and ethics. Maybe environmental sustainability is listed out there. But I think the most important thing is aligning that to, again, what you're actually doing. So it's important to walk the talk. So you want to make sure that you're integrating your business practices in that social responsibility that you're saying you feel is important. So think about, maybe you need to review your supply chain contracts because you want to align with, maybe you've got a DEI and B program that you're very vocal about, you're putting out on your employer brand. Well, you can't sit there and say, I'm in support of a particular group, but then never use them as your supply chain. So, what are your criteria for selecting vendors? How do you bring that in from a social responsibility standpoint? Looking at your manufacturing practices, it's great to sit there and say, we recycle, reduce, reuse, recycle, but what if your manufacturing practices are creating significant amounts of waste? You need to look at that process and find ways to have a direct impact. You might want to implement a scholarship program that's in support of, organizations or groups that you're providing support to. So again, just that deeper integration that rings true to your organization. So it's not enough just to post support out on social media or write a donation check. You need to align who you are as an organization, which you're saying in your values, this is who you are, with what you're actually doing. And so that's going to help with your employees will see that. It'll gain trust with them. Candidates where this is important to them They'll be attracted to your organization because it aligns with their values. And I mean, that's the perfect scenario, is if you can recruit people who believe what you believe. They're going to fit your culture. They're going to stick with you too, because there's more to the relationship than a paycheck. Instead, they feel good about what they're doing. So a couple common areas, because I think people question, what does it all mean? What's the definition of this? Some common areas that organizations are considering under that social responsibility kind of umbrella is, as I mentioned, the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging activities, environmental sustainability, fair trade. Again, do you want to buy from vendors in potentially third world countries that are not paying people effectively, or sustainable wages, and then responsible labor practices within your own environment, within anybody that you're doing business with. So those are things to measure, as well as make sure that you're considering when you're making decisions as an organization.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Those are great examples. And I feel like a common one too is just volunteering. A lot of organizations say they value volunteering, but then it's like, do you give your employees volunteer opportunities? Do you list it out kind of to start to finish thing? Like, do you follow up with them? How was their experience? How do they get involved in the community? Like, you can't just stop at 25%. You got to keep it going, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, there's some organizations, and I won't name any, but very recognizable that you see out in the world wearing their volunteer T-shirts, and you see them at events all over the place. And so that that's really something that organization takes seriously.
Right. Well, just kind of wrapping up here today, one more question for you. Leadership development is obviously crucial for organizational growth. So what initiatives are HR departments implementing to identify and nurture leadership talent within the organization?
This is a really key area for me, and I feel like we don't spend quite enough time and energy on this in actual practice. So often we promote the best individual contributor into running a department, but we haven't necessarily stepped back and said, are they a leader? Are they somebody that people go to naturally? When the manager's in a meeting, who do they actually reach out amongst their team members to get support and help? So first, I think your selection process, it needs to definitely be evaluated a little bit more. And you need to make sure those individual contributors can still grow without becoming managers, because not every person should become a leader. But then another aspect of leadership development for me is actually the job evaluation of our frontline and mid-level managers. We have a lot going on in these positions. There's high expectations of them, and they don't always have the time and resources to be able to actually do the job effectively. So it's a really common pressure point. And what I mean by that is senior leadership has expectations of goals and initiatives and growth plans that need to be executed on by these team members. And now we're seeing employee expectations, and the employee experience has increased a lot of what they expect out of their frontline manager. They're expecting that their managers, one, know them as individuals, that they adjust their leadership style to them, that they're helping them develop in their careers, that they're representing the organization on a day-to-day basis, strong communication, regular feedback. There's a lot that's being expected at that. And then these roles commonly have extremely high spans of control. So you see, it's not uncommon to see a supervisor have 20 to 30 direct reports. If you expect them to know their employees on an individual basis and provide a strong employee experience while also meeting the strategic goals and needs of the organization, probably need to take a look at the span of control, because that's probably not a realistic ask. And they also have a lot of administrative work, whether it's time cards and performance reviews and just all these tools and resources that they have to do on an ongoing basis. So I think it's really important that we, especially as HR, take a step back and look at whether it's a program we're implementing, what's the impact on them, but also, are we really designing the jobs in a way that's going to make them successful? So it's just I don't know, it's a key area for me is making sure that they're spending that time, especially given we know that direct managers are a key reason why employees stay or leave an organization. So if we don't provide the support to those specific individuals, how are we really long-term impacting our ability to get the right talent in the organization? So like I said, we need to make sure that we're focusing on evaluating what those job responsibilities are, how many direct reports they might have, what's the individual contributor tasks we ask of them too, because oftentimes they're also expected to be a producer on top of being the manager of a very large team. That you might need to provide administrative support to them or AI automation tools or something to make their jobs a little bit easier. And then being clear on training them on the skill sets that they need to do their job well and providing very clear expectations of what they're responsible for so that they can be successful. And of course, MRA can, help with the training and the development and even the job evaluations if that's something that people are interested in. But I do think it's important. We very often look at our senior leaders and we're looking a lot at our individual contributors these days, but this group in the middle gets kind of forgotten.
Well, I think that's a great place to close out on, a great conversation today. So Carrie, I want to thank you for your expertise in sharing that and sharing the trends that you've been seeing in HR currently. But to our listeners, I want to thank you also for tuning in. Like Carrie mentioned, we have resources linked in the show notes, so make sure to check those out today. Or you can find them at mranet.org. We also have Carrie's LinkedIn profile linked in the show notes. So if you'd like to connect with her or ask her any follow-up questions, be sure to connect with Carrie. I'm sure she'd be happy to do that. Carrie, again, thank you for joining me today. And to our listeners, we will see you next week.
And that wraps up our content for this episode. Be sure to reference the show notes where you can sign up to connect for more podcast updates. Check out other MRA episodes on your favorite podcast platform. And as always, make sure to follow MRA's 30-Minute Thrive so you don't miss out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next Wednesday to carry on the HR conversation.